You will do exactly as I say.
Right.
I'm not going anywhere. You don't control me.
I said, move out of my seat.
You're mistaken. This is my seat, and I'm not moving. Yeah. You think you can talk to me like that? I think I'm making it abundantly clear that you cannot talk to me like this.
I told you to stay out of my way. I'm not going anywhere.
You can't do this to me! Let her through right now!
Ma'am, you need to return to your seat immediately.
She doesn't belong here. Remove her now.
But ma'am, she has a valid pass.
We paid for this entire row. Move her.
I'm sorry, I cannot do that.
Boots. Excuse me, I don't know who let you sit here, but this cabin is for paying passengers. Coach is that way. Boots. The words didn't come out as a whisper. They didn't come out as a question. Vanessa Cole said them the way people say things they've believed their whole lives. Loud, certain, and without a single glance at the woman she was actually speaking to. Boots. She looked at seat 2A the way a landlord looks at a stranger sitting in their favorite chair. Like the problem wasn't what she was saying. Boots. The problem was that she even had to say it at all. Behind her, Grant Cole straightened the cuff of his charcoal blazer and said nothing. Boots. He didn't need to. His wife was handling it. She always handled it. The woman in seat 2A didn't move. Boots. She didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't even look up from the space just past the window. She sat with the particular stillness of someone who had been here before. Not on this flight, not in this exact row, but in this moment. Boots. This specific kind of moment. The one where a stranger looks at you and decides, in under 3 seconds, that you're in the wrong place. Boots. Her name was Dr. Amara Whitfield, and she was in exactly the right place. What Vanessa Cole didn't know, what nobody standing in that first-class cabin knew, was that in less than 40 minutes she would not just lose this argument. Boots. She would lose her seat, her status, and in front of 290 strangers, a piece of the story she'd been telling herself about who she was. Boots. A captain who chose the wrong side would have to walk back down that aisle and choose again. And the system quietly failing somewhere in the belly of that aircraft, the very system standing between 290 people and a very long night stranded on the tarmac, could only be repaired by one person in the world. Boots. The woman they were trying to throw out of seat 2A. If you've ever been completely right about something and still had to stand there while the room acted like you owed everyone an explanation, if you know that particular kind of quiet from the inside, stay with this one. Boots. It goes places you are not expecting. Let's go back. Not to the moment Vanessa opened her mouth, though we'll get there. Boots. Let's go back 90 minutes to a first-class lounge at a busy airport outside Atlanta, Georgia, where a woman in a slate gray blazer sat in a leather chair doing something that looked like reading, but was, in fact, something else entirely. Boots. The lounge was the kind of place built to feel calm and mostly succeeding. Soft lighting, warm wood tones, the roar of the runway outside, dulled down into something closer to a library. Boots. The quiet turn of a page, the muted chime of a gate call, the soft click of somebody's laptop keys. Boots. Most people in that lounge were doing what people in first-class lounges do, decompressing or performing the appearance of it. Boots. Scrolling phones, staring at the middle distance, with the flat expression of frequent flyers who stopped being impressed by any of this years ago. Boots. Dr. Amara Whitfield was not decompressing. She sat in the third chair from the window with a tablet propped against her knee, doing what she did in the 45 minutes before every long flight. Boots. She was checking her own work, not because anyone had asked her to, not because there was a deadline hanging over her. Boots. Because it was a habit built into her over 15 years of understanding one simple, unforgiving fact. The difference between almost right and exactly right can matter enormously when the thing you built is responsible for keeping an aircraft in the sky. Boots. The screen on her tablet wasn't a movie. It wasn't a boarding pass or an email chain. It was a navigation architecture map. Dense, layered, annotated in her own handwriting, with data lines running between nodes like tributaries of a river system that only made sense to people who'd spent years learning its language. Boots. In the corner of the screen, almost too small to notice, sat a logo, Ironbridge Aerosystems. She wore dark jeans, a plain white shirt, and that slate gray blazer that had crossed enough time zones to still somehow look new. Boots. Clean sneakers. No jewelry except a slim black watch on her left wrist that, if you looked closely, was not a fashion accessory at all. Boots. It was a piece of hardware, no logos anywhere, no designer bag. One black carry-on, functional, parked by her chair. Boots. To anyone glancing over, she looked like a woman on a business trip. Unremarkable, in the way lounges tend to measure remarkable. Boots. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up without looking away from the tablet. The voice on the other end belonged to Julian Reyes, her executive assistant at Ironbridge. Boots. 29 years old, precise, and the only person alive who could reliably reach her once she'd mentally already boarded the plane. Boots. Denver confirmed your keynote slot, he said. Opening session, 9 a.m. You're the first speaker. Good, she said, pinching the map on her tablet and zooming into a cluster of nodes in the lower right quadrant. Boots. Tell them I'll have the updated flight guidance demo ready before we land. Already sent the preview deck. A pause. Dr. Boots. Whitfield, do you want me to flag your seat assignment with the airline? You're in 2A, but I noticed the Cole party has a standing preference request on file for the front cabin. Boots. Sometimes the airline bumps. No, she said, not sharply, just with the specific, worn smooth certainty of a woman who had thought about this exact category of problem more times than she could count and had long since stopped making room for it. Boots. I'll handle it myself if anything comes up. Understood. Safe flight. She set the phone down. Through the floor-to-ceiling window beside her, the tarmac glowed with the blue-white cold of a March evening. Boots. Ground crews moved beneath the bellies of parked jets in their patient, practiced choreography. 3 gates down sat the wide-body aircraft that would be her flight tonight. Boots. A maintenance cart idled near the engine housing. A technician made notes on a tablet of his own. She recognized that aircraft. Boots. Not the way a passenger recognizes a plane. The way an architect recognizes a building she helped design. That particular jet, and every other jet in that airline's long-haul fleet, had been retrofitted 18 months earlier with the 4th-generation Whitfield Flight Guidance Suite. Boots. Version 4. 2. Her system, not named after her by the airline, not by any marketing department. Boots. Named by the engineers at Ironbridge, who'd built it with her, who'd spent 4 years testing the framework she designed from the ground up, and who'd started calling it by her name so many times in the internal documentation that by the time it reached the manufacturer, the name had simply stuck. Boots. She didn't feel proud looking at that plane. Pride wasn't quite the word. It was something closer to responsibility. The particular weight of knowing that the thing you built is out there now, doing exactly what you intended it to do, and that you are the only person on Earth who can be completely certain it's still doing it correctly. Boots. She zoomed back out on the map, scrolled to a new section, kept checking. 10 minutes later, the boarding announcement rolled softly through the lounge speakers. Boots. Flight 219, Atlanta to Amsterdam. Amara closed the tablet, slid it into her carry-on, and stood in the unhurried way of someone who'd learned long ago that rushing through an airport isn't efficiency. It's anxiety wearing a disguise. Boots. She'd made her peace with terminals years ago. She moved through the gathering crowd without urgency, handed her boarding pass and passport to the gate agent, a young woman who smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Doctor." Boots. Whitfield, you're in 2A, right this way, with absolutely no idea that in 40 minutes she'd be one of the people watching the whole thing unfold. Boots. Amara stepped onto the jet bridge. The cabin was quiet when she boarded. A few passengers already settled, the soft click of overhead bins, the distant movement of flight attendants prepping the galley for a full flight. Boots. She found seat 2A without assistance. Window seat, first row of the forward suite, the kind of position that looks out over the wing and gives you a clean view of whatever city you're leaving behind. Boots. She stowed her bag, sat down, ordered sparkling water with lime from the attendant who passed by, and took the tablet back out. Boots. Everything was quiet. It didn't stay that way. They arrived the way certain people always arrive, as if the space they were entering had been sitting empty, waiting for them specifically, and everyone else inside it was simply furniture. Boots. Vanessa Cole came first, one hand trailing along the overhead bins as she walked, the other gripping a monogrammed carry-on that cost more than most people's rent. Boots. A silk scarf sat knotted at her throat in that particular shade of rust orange that a certain income bracket had decided was this season's color, tied with the practiced looseness of a knot, rehearsed into looking effortless. Boots. Her sunglasses were pushed up into her hair even though they were indoors. Her eyes swept the cabin the way a store manager sweeps a floor, surveying, categorizing, deciding what was in order and what wasn't. Boots. Grant Cole followed 2 steps behind with the ease of a man who had never once stood in a line that wasn't marked VIP. Boots. His blazer was expensive without being flashy, the kind that announces money quietly, to people who already know how to read it. Boots. He carried nothing. Their bags were being handled. His hands stayed in his pockets. He glanced around the cabin with the mild, satisfied interest of a man for whom the world had, so far, generally arranged itself to his preferences. Boots. Vanessa's survey of the cabin took about 4 seconds. Then she reached row 2. She stopped. She looked at seat 2A. Boots. Then at the woman sitting in it. Then at the seat number stenciled above it. Then back at the woman. Boots. What crossed Vanessa Cole's face in that moment wasn't confusion exactly. It was the specific expression of a person whose internal model of the world has just thrown an error. A mismatch between what she expected to see and what she was actually seeing, and a brain that flags that mismatch not as new information, but as a mistake. Boots. Something to be corrected. She didn't speak to Amara directly. She half-turned to Grant and said it loudly enough for the first 3 rows to hear. Boots. There must be some kind of mix-up. Grant stepped up beside her, glanced at the seat number, glanced at Amara, and smiled, the wide, patient smile of a man delivering news he considers a personal favor. Boots. I think there's been a mistake, sweetheart. This is the forward cabin. Coach boards from the back. The word sweetheart drifted through the cabin like something that had come loose and was now rolling around the floor for everyone to step over. Boots. 2 rows back, a woman named Priya Sandhu, 29, dark-haired, a travel writer who'd flown enough routes to recognize this particular opening line as the first sentence of a very specific kind of story, reached slowly into her bag and closed her fingers around her phone without pulling it out yet. Boots. In 3B, a man named Desmond Okowai, a partner at a mid-sized law firm, stopped typing mid-email. In row 4, an older woman, Ingrid Halverson, 63, Norwegian by way of Minneapolis, lowered the novel she'd been reading with the focused pleasure of someone with nowhere to be for the next 8 hours. Boots. Amara didn't look up right away. She finished the sentence she was reading on her tablet, set it down on the small table beside her, folded her hands, and looked at Grant Cole with the expression of someone who has been interrupted during something important and is now choosing, very deliberately, exactly how much of her attention this deserves. Boots. Seat 2A, she said. That's me. My boarding pass is in my hand if you'd like to see it. She held it up, clear, unambiguous, her name printed across the top in the airline's standard font. Boots. Grant's smile didn't disappear exactly. It shifted, became more patient, more explanatory, as if she'd simply misunderstood the situation, and he was here to gently walk her through it. Boots. Look, we fly this route every single month. These front seats are basically ours at this point. We've got a standing preference on file with the airline. Boots. If you got bumped up here by mistake, that's totally fine. These things happen. No judgment. But we're going to need that seat back. Boots. No judgment. 2 words carrying an entire verdict. Marcus Ruiz, 28, a junior flight attendant moving through the cabin with a stack of welcome cards, felt the tension in the air before he understood what was actually being said, and came over with the careful tread of someone stepping into a situation he wasn't yet sure of. Boots. Can I help you find your seats? Vanessa didn't look at him. She kept her eyes locked on Amara. Yes. Boots. Tell her that 2A is taken. Marcus checked Vanessa's boarding pass, then Grant's. Then looked at Amara, who extended hers without being asked. Boots. He scanned it with the handheld reader clipped to his jacket. The confirmation blinked back in 2 seconds. Flight 219, Seat 2A, Whitfield, Doctor. Boots. A priority boarding, confirmed. He checked the Coles' passes again, 2B and 2C. Ma'am, Marcus said carefully, your seats are 2B and 2C. Boots. This passenger is confirmed in 2A. These are 3 separate seats in this suite configuration. They don't share the same window access. Boots. Grant's patient smile began its slow conversion into something else. Son, do you have any idea how much we spend with this airline every year? Boots. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. Priya's hand, still inside her bag, tightened around her phone. Boots. Amara picked her tablet back up, not because the conversation was over, but because she was giving Grant Cole precisely the amount of attention the situation warranted, which was considerably less than he was expecting, which made him angrier than anything she could have actually said out loud. Boots. Vanessa sat down in seat 2B. Not because she'd accepted the situation, because she'd decided to occupy it. A territorial statement, the way you might hold a parking space with your bumper before you've fully committed to the fight. Boots. She dropped her monogrammed bag onto the shared ottoman, between 2A and 2B. It landed with the soft, deliberate thud of an assertion. Boots. Then she looked at Amara. "I don't know how you got into this cabin," Vanessa said. The theatrical disbelief from a moment ago was gone. Boots. What replaced it was quieter, and in its own way worse, the flat certainty of someone stating a belief she'd held so long she'd never had to examine it. Boots. But I know the difference between someone who belongs here and someone who found a way in. The words moved through the cabin the way cold air moves through a room when a window opens without warning. Boots. You feel it before you've registered what changed. Priya's phone came out of the bag. She didn't open the camera yet. Boots. She set it face up on her knee and watched the back of Vanessa's head. Desmond had stopped pretending to work on his email. Boots. Ingrid had put her book all the way down. Amara looked at Vanessa's carry-on sitting on the ottoman that was part of the seat configuration she had paid for, that had her name attached to it in the airline system. Boots. Then she looked at Vanessa. Her expression was a particular kind of calm. Not the calm of someone who isn't feeling anything. The calm of someone who has learned, over many years and many rooms like this one, to keep what she's feeling in a separate compartment while she handles the situation directly in front of her. Boots. She didn't move the bag. She didn't ask Vanessa to move it. She turned her attention back to her tablet. Boots. Grant stepped fully into the row, leaning his forearm against the overhead bin so his height filled the space above her. Boots. Nobody's trying to make this into a thing. If your booking got confused somewhere along the line, it happens. Online check-in, third-party agents. These systems glitch all the time. Boots. No shame in it. Just take a seat a little further back and we can all move on. There it was again, the gift he kept extending. Boots. The opportunity to retreat gracefully, to accept the version of the story where she'd made a mistake, rather than the true version, in which her presence in that seat was the result of a deliberate, paid, confirmed choice she'd made a month ago. Boots. Amara looked up at him, a long, quiet moment. "I booked this seat 4 weeks ago," she said. "I paid for this seat." Boots. "My name is on the manifest, on the boarding pass this young man just scanned, and in the airline's confirmed passenger records." Boots. "I will be sitting in it for the entire flight. Not loud, not sharp, every word clean, separate, and exactly the right size." Boots. Grant blinked. Vanessa made a sound, a short, compressed exhale that somehow carried both contempt and theatrical exasperation in a single breath. Boots. She turned toward the aisle, searching for someone with more authority. "This is exactly what's wrong with flying these days." Boots. "You'd think for what we pay, ma'am." Marcus reappeared, this time with the tension of someone who'd made up his mind which direction to lean. Boots. "I've confirmed the boarding pass. Dr. Whitfield is in her assigned seat. I'm not able to ask her to move." Boots. The word doctor landed differently than Marcus probably intended. Vanessa's eyes moved to him with a new and uncharitable quality of attention. Boots. Grant's posture shifted, no longer casually leaning, now planted, feet squared in the aisle, his voice dropping into the register men use when they want to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. Boots. "I want to speak to whoever is running this cabin. This is a service issue, and I expect it to be treated like one." Boots. In row 3, Priya opened her camera. She didn't go live immediately. She hit record and angled the phone toward the front of the cabin at hip height, screen face down against her leg so the red light wouldn't show in the aisle. Boots. 6 years as a travel writer had taught her exactly what a service issue looked like. And this wasn't that. Boots. She typed a quick caption into her notes app. "Live on flight 219, first-class cabin. Woman with a confirmed boarding pass in 2A being pressured to move." Boots. She hasn't raised her voice. She hasn't moved. Watch this. She hit the live stream button. Viewer count, 12, then 40. Boots. Then 130. Grant turned to Vanessa. "I'm gonna go find the purser." "Good," Vanessa said, as though he'd suggested something wise. Boots. He strode toward the galley with the gait of a man who had never once had to wait for something he actually wanted. Boots. Priya's viewer count climbed past 800 before Grant even reached the curtain. Yolanda Briggs had been a senior purser for Sterling Continental Airways for 19 years, and in that time she'd developed a very particular set of instincts, the kind that keep a cabin functioning at 35,000 feet. Boots. Her first instinct was simple: find the passenger who can be moved and move them, not because it was fair. Boots. Because it was fast. A seating dispute that delayed a flight cost the airline money, and cost Yolanda a headache, and cost every single passenger on board time they'd never get back. Boots. Who was actually right could be sorted out later. The flight was now. She came out of the galley in response to Marcus's quiet radio call and to Grant Cole, who arrived at the galley entrance with both hands already raised, in the universal posture of a man accustomed to being catered to. Boots. She listened to him for 45 seconds. Long enough to understand the shape of things, and long enough to register, without commenting on it, the specific way he kept saying the passenger in 2A instead of the woman in 2A, as if stripping out the human noun made the request sound tidier. Boots. Then she walked into the cabin. Yolanda was compact, dark hair threaded with silver she'd never bothered dyeing away, and she moved through the aisle with the efficiency of someone who'd walked it several thousand times. Boots. She clocked the whole cabin as she went. Priya with a phone angled toward the front, Desmond with a closed laptop and an alert posture. Boots. Ingrid sitting very still, watching, and Amara in 2A, hands folded, tablet resting on the table beside her, gaze out the window at the wing. Boots. Yolanda put on the expression she used for situations that needed warmth to function as a weapon. I understand we have a situation, Mrs. Boots. Cole. I can see there's some frustration, and I want everyone in this cabin comfortable before we push back. Vanessa, who had gone back to inspecting her manicure, looked up with the expression of someone who has finally located management. Boots. There's a simple solution. She moves. We don't need to make this complicated. Yolanda looked at Amara. Amara looked back. Boots. Yolanda smiled. Professional, warm, fixed in place. Ma'am, I do apologize for the disruption. We have availability further back, still in our extended cabin, lovely window seat. Boots. I wonder if you'd be open to relocating, just for this flight. We'd make it worth your while. No, Amara said. Boots. She said it the way she'd said everything else, level, clear, without an ounce of drama, and without an ounce of give. Boots. I have a confirmed seat, paid in full, 4 weeks in advance. I have done nothing wrong tonight. I'm not the one who needs to move. Boots. Yolanda's smile held, but something behind her eyes recalculated. This wasn't going the way it usually went. Usually the quiet passenger folds. Boots. Usually the path of least resistance is the polite one. Ma'am, I understand this feels unfair, but I do need to keep this cabin. Boots. You need to enforce the seating this airline sold, Amara said, cutting in. Not with heat, just with the precision of someone finishing the sentence correctly. Boots. I am in the seat I paid for. If there's a service issue tonight, it isn't coming from me. Vanessa let out a short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. Boots. Unbelievable. This is why, Mrs. Cole, Yolanda said, turning, trying to reroute the pressure somewhere she could manage it. Let me see what other options. Boots. There are no other options I'm interested in, Vanessa snapped. I want her out of this seat, or I want to speak to the captain. Boots. The word captain landed in the cabin with a small, cold weight. At the back of row 3, Priya's stream had crossed 2,000 viewers. Boots. Comments were scrolling faster than she could read them. Someone had already clipped the first 90 seconds and reposted it with a caption that would, within the hour, travel further than the plane itself. Boots. Yolanda straightened her jacket, took a slow breath through her nose, and said the sentence she'd hoped she wouldn't have to say tonight. Boots. I'll speak with the captain. Captain Desmond Price had flown for Sterling Continental for 22 years, the last 11 of them in the left seat of wide-body aircraft, and he had a rule he'd carried with him since his very first command. When a purser comes to the cockpit door before pushback, it's never good news, and it's never nothing. Boots. He listened to Yolanda's summary, the confirmed seat, the confrontation, the live stream she mentioned almost as an afterthought, the fact that the passenger in the disputed seat hadn't raised her voice once. Boots. He rubbed his jaw and thought, not for the first time in his career, that the version of a story told by the loudest person in it is rarely the version that turns out to be true. Boots. He came out of the cockpit himself. The cabin quieted the way cabins do when a captain in uniform steps through the curtain, not because he'd asked for silence, but because the presence of authority tends to make people perform whatever version of themselves they think authority wants to see. Boots. He stopped at row 2. He looked at the boarding passes Yolanda handed him. He looked at Amara, sitting exactly where the manifest said she should be sitting. Boots. He looked at Vanessa and Grant, and then, under pressure, tired, wanting this handled fast so they could push back and make their slot, Captain Price made the wrong call. Boots. Dr. Whitfield, he said, I understand you're fully within your rights here. But we have a cabin full of people who need to get moving, and I'd appreciate it if you could work with us on a resolution so we can get this flight in the air. Boots. Work with us on a resolution. 4 words that once again quietly moved the weight of the problem onto the one person who hadn't caused it. Boots. Amara looked at him. For the first time since Vanessa Cole had opened her mouth, something flickered across Amara's face that wasn't calm. It was closer to disappointment. Boots. Not surprised, she'd seen this particular failure of nerve before, dressed in different uniforms. Captain, she said, I am the resolution. Boots. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. There is nothing for me to resolve. Priya's caption updated in real time. Captain just asked the right passenger to compromise. Boots. Watch what she says next. Viewer count, 6,400. Captain Price opened his mouth to answer, and that was the exact moment his radio crackled with something else entirely. Boots. A voice from the flight deck, tight and clipped in a way that had nothing to do with seating charts. Boots. Captain, we need you back up front now. He excused himself and fooed fast up the aisle, Yolanda a step behind him. Boots. The cabin, for a moment, forgot about the seating dispute entirely. Something in the tone of that voice had reached rows that hadn't been paying attention until now. Boots. 2 minutes later, the intercom clicked on. It was the first officer's voice, careful and even in the particular way pilots are trained to sound even when they don't feel that way. Boots. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the flight deck. We're showing an indication with one of our navigation systems that we need to fully clear before departure. Boots. We apologize for the delay. We'll have an update for you shortly. A ripple moved through the cabin, the low murmur of 290 people doing quiet math about connecting flights and hotel bookings, and how long shortly usually actually means. Boots. In row 2, Vanessa muttered something to Grant about how this was, of course, exactly what happens on a flight where the staff can't even handle basic seating, as if the two things were somehow related. Boots. Grant nodded along, grateful for a new target. Amara didn't say anything. She reopened her tablet. She'd heard the phrase navigation system indication before. Boots. Many times. It was, in fact, roughly her entire professional life, translated into airline customer service language. And something about the specific cadence of that announcement. The particular kind of caution in the first officer's voice told her this wasn't routine. Boots. She opened a secure diagnostics app, buried 3 folders deep on her tablet, the one that didn't have an icon that looked like anything interesting, and typed in the aircraft's tail number from memory. Boots. She'd noticed it out the lounge window an hour earlier, the way she noticed things. The screen populated, a dense wall of subsystem checks. Boots. And there, near the bottom, flagged in amber. Flight Guidance Suite, Node Cluster 7, Intermittent Fault, Cross-check required before departure. Boots. Node Cluster 7. She knew Node Cluster 7 better than she knew most people. She had built Node Cluster 7. Boots. And an intermittent fault in that specific cluster, on that specific aircraft, meant one of 2 things. Either a straightforward reset that any competent ground technician could clear in 20 minutes, or a deeper synchronization error, buried in a patch that had gone out 11 days ago, the kind of error that a ground crew without deep access to the original architecture could spend hours chasing without ever finding. Boots. She'd flagged that exact patch as a risk during final review. Nobody outside a very small circle at Ironbridge knew that. Boots. She closed the diagnostics app and sat with that information for a moment, watching the ground crew's flashlights, moving under the wing outside her window. Boots. 40 minutes passed. The cabin's patience, never a deep well on a full flight, was running thin. Somewhere behind the galley curtain, raised voices had started and stopped twice. A ground technician, then a second one, then a supervisor on a phone call that clearly wasn't going well. Boots. Yolanda came back down the aisle, her professional warmth fraying at the edges in a way she was working hard to keep out of her face. Boots. Captain Price followed a moment later, And this time when he stopped at row 2, there was nothing performative left in him. Boots. Dr. Whitfield, he said quieter this time, and different, less like a man managing a cabin and more like a man who'd just run out of options. Boots, I need to ask you something, and I want to be straightforward about why I'm asking it. Our maintenance contact ran your name against the manufacturer's technical liaison list as a formality when we opened a support ticket with the equipment vendor. Boots, your name came back attached to the flight guidance system installed on this aircraft. I don't fully understand what that means. Boots, but I'm told it means something. Vanessa, still in 2B, let out a small, disbelieving laugh. I'm sorry, she's a technician? Boots, this whole time she's been sitting here acting like... Mrs. Cole, Captain Price said, without even turning his head, I need you to give us the aisle. Boots. Amara set down her tablet. What's the fault code, she said. A request for data. Yolanda read it off her own device. Boots. Node cluster 7. Intermittent. Cross-check required. Amara nodded slowly, the way a person nods when a suspicion they didn't want confirmed gets confirmed anyway. Boots. I know exactly what that is, she said. It's not a hardware fault. It's a synchronization error in a software patch that shipped 11 days ago. Boots. I flagged it during final review as a low-probability edge case. It looks like the edge case found you. Can it be fixed? Boots. Captain Price asked. Yes, but not by a ground technician working from the standard maintenance manual. That patch touches proprietary architecture that isn't in the public documentation. Boots. It needs someone who understands the underlying framework, not just the checklist built on top of it. Do you know someone we could reach? Boots. Even by phone we could. Captain, Amara said. I designed that system. I wrote that framework. I am, as of right now, the only person within several thousand miles of this aircraft who can look at that fault and actually fix it instead of guessing at it. Boots. The cabin had gone very still. Priya's stream had crossed 11,000 viewers, and the comment section had stopped joking around entirely. Boots. Captain Price looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that, 20 minutes earlier, he would have considered unthinkable. Boots. Would you be willing to come to the flight deck? Amara stood. She didn't look at Vanessa. She didn't look at Grant. Boots. She reached up, retrieved her carry-on from the overhead bin with the same unhurried calm she'd carried through the entire evening, and stepped past Vanessa Cole's monogrammed bag, still sitting on the ottoman without so much as brushing it. Boots. She followed Captain Price and Yolanda up the aisle, past 290 pairs of eyes, toward the cockpit door. Boots. Behind her in row 2, Vanessa Cole sat in a silence that had nothing graceful in it at all. Boots. The flight deck of a wide-body aircraft is a small, dense room built entirely around function, and Amara had been in more of them than she could count, not as a passenger, but as the person kneeling beside an open-access panel at 2 in the morning with a laptop balanced on her knee, arguing quietly with a line of code until it agreed to behave. Boots. The first officer, a woman named Renata Cross, looked up as Amara came through the door, her expression somewhere between relief and disbelief. Boots. You're the Whitfield in the Whitfield Flight Guidance Suite, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I am. I've read your integration paper twice. Boots. I didn't expect to meet you at a jet bridge tonight. Neither did I, Amara said, already crouching beside the access terminal, tablet out, cable in hand. Boots. Let's see what 11 days of patch drift did to my cluster. She worked the way she always worked, economical, focused, half a conversation happening in her head that nobody else was invited to. Boots. She pulled the fault log, cross-referenced it against her own architecture notes, found the mismatch inside 4 minutes, and spent the next 18 quietly rewriting the handshake sequence between 2 subsystems that had stopped speaking the same version of the same language. Boots. Renata watched her work with the specific fascination of a pilot who has spent a career trusting systems she didn't build, now watching the person who built one of them take it apart and put it back together in real time. Boots. There, Amara said finally, closing the panel. Cluster 7 is stable. I want a full self-test run before you push back, not just a green light. The actual multi-cycle test, it takes 90 extra seconds and it's worth every one of them. Boots. Captain Price relayed the instruction. The test ran, green across every line. He looked at her, really looked at her in a way he hadn't managed to do back in row 2, and something in his face rearranged itself. Boots. Dr. Whitfield, he said, I owe you an apology. Not for the fault, for what I said to you before I understood any of this. Boots. I asked you to be the one to compromise when you were never the problem to begin with. That was wrong. And I knew on some level it was wrong even while I was saying it. Boots. I just wanted this handled fast, and I let that be more important than getting it right. I appreciate you saying that, Amara said. Boots. And she meant it. Not performing forgiveness, just accepting an honest account for what it was. There's something else, Captain Price said, and something in his jaw tightened. Boots. I need to go back out there and finish this properly. Would you give me a minute before you return to your seat? Boots. Amara nodded. Boots. Back in the cabin, 290 people had spent the last 25 minutes doing what people on a stationary aircraft do. Refreshing flight tracking apps, texting people who were waiting for them, watching a live stream that had, by now, crossed 40,000 viewers and started showing up on accounts that had nothing to do with air travel at all. Boots. Vanessa Cole had spent those 25 minutes in a state of steadily curdling anxiety that she was working very hard to disguise as boredom. Boots. She'd checked her phone 11 times. Twice she'd caught her own name, misspelled, but unmistakably her, in a comment thread underneath a clip of herself, saying, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Boots. Grant had gone very quiet. Captain Price walked back down the aisle. This time he didn't stop at the curtain. Boots. He stood in the open space at the front of the cabin, in full view of every row, and waited until the murmur died down on its own. Because he wanted them listening, not silenced. Boots. Before we push back, he said, at a volume that reached every seat in first class and business, I need to say something to this cabin. Boots. Vanessa and Grant were both in their seats. They didn't look up immediately. Then they did, because there was nowhere else left to look. Boots. A passenger in this cabin tonight was harassed at length in her confirmed, paid, correctly assigned seat. My crew failed to properly enforce this airline's own policy. Boots. And then I came out here myself and compounded that failure by asking the passenger who was harmed to, in my own words, work with us on a resolution. Boots. She was in her seat. She had done nothing wrong. There was no resolution required of her. I made the wrong call, and it will be in my report tonight, in writing, with my name on it. Boots. He turned and looked directly at Grant and Vanessa. Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole, you'll be relocating to our economy cabin for the remainder of this flight. Boots. If that arrangement isn't acceptable to you, you're welcome to deplane now and rebook with another carrier. Those are your two options. Boots. Vanessa's chin dropped, just slightly. It was the only movement she made. Grant found his voice, low and tight. We've flown this route for 16? Boots. I know, Captain Price said. It's in your file, and what happened tonight will also be in your file, and how this airline chooses to respond to it will be decided above my authority the moment we land. Boots. That's not my call to make. What is my call is this. You will not be sitting in this cabin for the next 8 hours. Boots. Grant looked at his wife. Vanessa looked at Grant. Then, without another word, she stood. She reached up, pulled her monogrammed bag from the overhead bin. The same bag she'd set on Amara's ottoman, what felt by now like a very long time ago, picked up her handbag and walked toward the back of the aircraft without looking left or right. Boots. Grant followed her. They moved through the rows in the specific silence of people who have been in public long enough to understand that the worst possible thing they could do right now is say one more word that might get remembered. Boots. Ingrid Halvorsen watched them pass her row. When they'd gone by, she turned and looked at Amara, who had just returned to her seat. Boots. She didn't say anything dramatic. Just a small, deliberate nod, one person acknowledging another across a distance that had briefly, and unnecessarily, become much wider than it needed to be. Boots. Amara nodded back. Marcus appeared beside her seat, carrying a fresh glass of sparkling water with lime, exactly the way she'd ordered it before any of this started. Boots. Dr. Whitfield, he said, can I get you anything? She looked at the water. She looked at him. This is perfect, she said. Boots. Thank you, Marcus. He nodded and stepped back. He wasn't going to say more. He'd said what he needed to say by simply refusing to move her out of her seat an hour earlier, and she'd given him what he needed in return, and the rest lived quietly in the space between those two things. Boots. Desmond caught her eye from 3B. I have a complete written statement of what I witnessed, time-stamped and saved, in case the airline or anyone else needs it. Boots. Thank you, Amara said. If it comes to that, I'll let you know where to send it. Priya from 3B, no wait, from her seat across the aisle didn't livestream that part. Boots. She didn't say anything for the camera. She just leaned slightly toward Amara and said quietly, as one person to another, "Boots. Thank you for not moving." Amara looked at her. The smile that appeared was the first real one of the entire evening. Boots. Not triumphant, not relieved. Just real, the smile of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had for a moment gotten to set it down. Boots. Thank you, Amara said, for staying. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Price. Our technical issue has been fully resolved. Boots. We'll begin pushback in approximately 5 minutes. We thank you for your patience tonight. Flight time to Amsterdam is just under 8 hours, and we're expecting smooth conditions across the Atlantic. Boots. The cabin settled into the gentle reorganization of 290 people preparing for a long flight. Overhead bins clicked shut. Boots. Seatbelts drawn across laps. Tablets and paperbacks came out of bags. The comfortable rustle of a cabin finally, genuinely getting ready to go somewhere. Boots. Amara opened her tablet one more time. The architecture map was still exactly where she'd left it. She looked at it for a moment, then zoomed out to the full view. The whole system spread across the screen in its intricate, connected entirety. Boots. The plane that was about to carry her across an ocean was running on that system. The very lines on her screen were the lines that had just been confirmed stable and ready. An hour after two strangers had tried to convince a cabin full of people that she didn't belong in it. Boots. She picked up her water, took a sip, set it back down. Outside her window, the tarmac lights began sliding slowly backward as the pushback tug engaged. Boots. The aircraft was moving. They were on their way. By the time Flight 219 landed at Amsterdam Schiphol the following morning, the story had outrun the aircraft by several hours. Boots. Priya's clips had been shared across every major platform before the plane crossed the Irish coast. A national morning show had already reached out to her by the time the seatbelt signs switched off for landing. Boots. Sterling Continental Airways issued a public statement 6 hours after pushback, acknowledging the incident and committing to a full internal review. Boots. Vanessa and Grant Cole's loyalty accounts, 16 years of accumulated status, the thing Grant had reached for like a shield in the aisle, were suspended pending that review. Boots. Yolanda Briggs, the purser who'd tried to move the passenger who hadn't done anything wrong, was placed on administrative leave while the airline examined how a flaw meant to protect passengers had almost failed one instead. Boots. Sterling Continental's leadership team reached out to Ironbridge Aerosystems before Amara had even cleared customs. Boots. They requested a formal meeting, not just to apologize, though they did that too, but because they'd come to understand, somewhere over the Atlantic, that the woman their crew had nearly failed to protect that night was also the only reason 290 people hadn't spent their evening stranded on a runway in Atlanta. Boots. Both of those facts, they realized, were going to require some real reckoning. Amara delivered her keynote at the Global Aviation Innovation Summit at 9 o'clock the next morning, exactly as scheduled. Boots. She added 2 slides she hadn't prepared in advance. The first was about the distance between building something and being trusted in the very few spaces where that thing gets used. Boots. The second was about the quiet, compounding cost an entire industry pays when the people responsible for its future are asked, in 100 small ordinary moments, to make themselves smaller before anyone has even looked at their work. Boots. The room gave her a standing ovation. She thanked them, sat down, and opened her tablet. She had a second presentation to prepare for the following day. Boots. They had tried to send her to the back of the plane. She had walked into the cockpit instead and brought 290 people home safely. Boots. Dr. Amara Whitfield didn't fix that navigation fault because she had something to prove. She fixed it because 290 people needed to get somewhere, and she happened to be the only person on that aircraft who could help them get there. Boots. That's what it looks like when real competence simply refuses to be made small. The seat had always been hers. Boots. It had been hers from the moment she paid for it, 4 weeks before anyone in that cabin ever laid eyes on her. Boots. The only thing that changed on Flight 219 was that the people who doubted it were finally asked to reckon with exactly what their doubt had been built on, and found, in the end, that it had been built on nothing at all. Boots. This is a work of fiction. The characters, airline, company, and events depicted are entirely invented for storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to real people, companies, or specific incidents is purely coincidental. Boots. It's told the way it is because the feeling underneath it, the exhaustion of having to prove you belong somewhere you already paid to be, is real for a lot of people, even when the story itself isn't. Boots. If any part of this stayed with you, maybe let it be a reminder to look twice before deciding who belongs where.